Evelyn Carter thought she was marrying the man of God the entire town adored. Pastor Daniel Hayes was trusted, respected, and worshipped for his sermons on purity and salvation. But within 24 hours of their wedding, Evelyn uncovered a secret so disturbing it would shatter the community and expose the preacher's double life. When she saw maggots crawling from Daniel's jacket, she realized her husband wasn't a holy man at all but something far darker, hiding behind the pulpit. The church bells rang out across the small town, their echo carrying through the crisp afternoon air, signaling the beginning of what many considered the most anticipated wedding of the year. Evelyn Carter stood at the front of the aisle, her white gown trailing behind her, delicate lace catching the light that streamed through stained glass windows. The congregation admired her poise, whispering about how perfectly she and Pastor Daniel Hayes fit together. He was the trusted preacher, a man known for his sermons on purity and forgiveness, while she was the elegant school teacher who always greeted people with warmth. To the outside world, their union seemed blessed, divinely chosen. Yet even in that moment of beauty, Evelyn could not ignore the unease that curled deep inside her chest. As Daniel took her hand, sliding the wedding ring onto her finger, she felt a chill rush through her skin. His palm was cold, not the kind of nervous clamminess she expected, but the coldness of something lifeless. His eyes, usually sharp and piercing when he preached, looked clouded, distracted, almost as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. The smile on his face never reached those. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself it was nothing more than wedding day jitters, but a seed of doubt had already been planted. The ceremony unfolded, without flaw. The choir sang sweetly, the air smelled of roses, and the guests filled the pews with admiration. Daniel recited his vows with steady conviction, his voice booming through the church as though delivering one of his Sunday sermons. People wept at the beauty of his words, but Evelyn noticed the faint tremor in his jaw when he looked at her. Something about his presence, even in this holy moment, felt animal, almost staged, like a role he was playing too perfectly. When the couple kissed, cheers erupted. Outside the sun was bright, the sky was clear, and yet Evelyn could not shake the shadow that seemed to hover around her new husband. As they walked down the church steps together, she noticed an unusual detail that made her stomach tighten. Daniel's suit jacket, a pristine black, had a faint, unpleasant smell, almost imperceptible, like rotting wood or damp earth. She wrinkled her nose, but no one else seemed to notice. Guests hugged them, showered them with rice, and snapped photographs, immortalizing smiles that were not entirely honest. The reception was held in the churchyard, tables decorated with lilies and white cloth. Evelyn played her part as the glowing bride, accepting congratulations, cutting the cake, and posing for photos. Yet as the evening wore on, she found herself watching Daniel closely. He laughed with parishioners, shook hands, and blessed children with practiced ease. His charm was undeniable, but there were moments when his smile faltered, revealing a fleeting expression of something darker. She caught it once, when his gaze lingered on a group of young women. For the briefest second, his face looked predatory, a flicker gone as quickly as it appeared, masked again by the warmth everyone knew him for. Later, when the crowd dwindled and the celebration wound down, Evelyn walked past the row of tables and saw Daniel standing alone by the church wall, his head bowed. She thought he was praying, but as she drew closer, she saw his lips moving without sound, his hands clenched tight against his sides, his body was trembling. When he noticed her, he straightened instantly, plastering on a grin that seemed almost too wide. He kissed her forehead, guiding her back toward the departing guests, but the image of his silent muttering stayed with her. That night, as the car drove them toward their honeymoon house, Evelyn sat quietly beside him. Daniel hummed a hymn under his breath, calm and collected, but Evelyn's mind replayed every unsettling detail from the day. The coldness of his touch, the faint odor on his suit, the strange muttering by the church wall. She had married him in front of God and everyone she loved, yet she felt more like she had stepped into the first page of a mystery she was not ready to read. The thought chilled her, but she told herself she would uncover the truth soon enough. The town had seen a perfect wedding. Only Evelyn sensed that perfection was a carefully painted mask, and beneath it, something was waiting to be revealed. The countryside stretched out endlessly as the car moved along narrow winding roads, framed by thick woods on either side. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the trees blur past. The weight of the wedding still clung to her, not in the way of joy but in the form of a heaviness she couldn't name. Daniel drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel, his lips curving into that same calm smile he always wore in public. Every so often he would hum quietly, his voice low and controlled, almost hypnotic. Evelyn wanted to ask where exactly they were going, but she hesitated, not wanting to sound uneasy on their very first night as husband and wife. When the car finally pulled into a gravel driveway, Evelyn's eyes settled on the house waiting for them. At first glance, it looked charming, almost picturesque. A two-story cottage, with white shutters and climbing roses that reached toward the roof. Standing at the edge of an open field, the fading sunlight bathed it in golden hues, giving the illusion of warmth. Evelyn tried to let herself be comforted by the sight, but as soon as she stepped out of the car, a strange sensation washed over her. The air felt heavier here, and beneath the fragrance of roses lingered an odor, faint but undeniable. It reminded her of something spoiled, like fruit left too long in the heat. Daniel unlocked the front door with surprising ease, as though he had done it countless times before, though he claimed this was the first time he'd brought anyone here. The hinges groaned when the door swung open, the sound echoing unnaturally in the stillness. The interior of the house was dim, as though the sunlight had been swallowed before it could pass through the windows. Dust floated in the air, visible in the thin beams of light that cut across the room. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her skin prickling as if the house itself were watching her. Daniel moved quickly, drawing the curtains and lighting a lamp. The warm glow softened the room, revealing old furniture draped in faded cloths and wooden floors that creaked with each step. "It's been empty for years," he explained casually, but Evelyn noticed how comfortable he seemed, moving through the space like someone returning home. She trailed behind him, her fingers brushing along a dresser layered with dust. A faint trail was already carved into the grime, as though someone else had touched it recently. The further they moved through the house, the more Evelyn felt the strange odor growing stronger. It wasn't overpowering, but it clung to the back of her throat, sharp enough to make her uneasy. She thought of the smell on Daniel's jacket at the wedding and her chest tight. In the kitchen, a bowl of dried flowers sat on the table, brittle and crumbling to the touch, as if they had been placed there long ago and forgotten. In the hallway she noticed small scratches along the wall near the floor, marks too jagged and clustered to be from furniture. As evening gave way to night, Daniel prepared their room. Evelyn followed him upstairs, her steps reluctant. The bedroom was larger than she expected, with a wide bed and heavy curtains that blocked out the moonlight. She sat at the edge of the bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap, listening to the sounds of the house. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. Each creak of the floorboards, each groan of the wind through the shutters seemed amplified, as though the house itself was whispering secrets just beyond her understanding. When Daniel slipped into bed beside her, he fell asleep quickly, his breathing steady and deep. Evelyn, however, could not close her eyes. She lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, every sense alert. At one point, she thought she heard something faint below them, a sound like shuffling or dragging. She held her breath, straining to hear, but the noise faded into silence. Perhaps it was her imagination, she told herself, nerves twisting her thought. Still, unease gnawed at her, and the memory of the faint smell in the air haunted her with every breath she took. She turned on her side, looking at Daniel's face in the dim glow of the lamp. His features were calm, almost too calm, like a mask carved in stone. He seemed untouched by the uneasiness of the house, as though it belonged to him in a way she could not yet comprehend. Evelyn closed her eyes, forcing herself to rest, but a single question echoed in her mind. Why did this place feel less like a honeymoon home and more like a waiting room for something unspeakable? By the time sleep finally came, her dreams were restless, filled with the same heavy air and the scent of decay that clung to every corner of the house. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the heavy curtains, casting pale stripes of light across the wooden floor. Evelyn stirred restlessly in the bed, her body aching with the stiffness of poor sleep. The house had never truly gone quiet in the night. Every gust of wind had rattled the windows, every creak of the floorboards had set her nerves on edge. She rose slowly, listening. The silence now seemed too deliberate, as though the building was holding its breath. Daniel had already left. His side of the bed was cold, the sheets pulled tightly as if he had never been there at all. A note on the nightstand explained he had gone to the church to handle morning duties. Evelyn folded the paper carefully, her hands trembling, though she couldn't understand why. The thought of exploring the house unsettled her, yet being alone in the bedroom felt worse. She moved down the hallway, her bare feet brushing against the old carpet. Each step seemed louder than it should have been. By the time she reached the stairs, a faint odor drifted toward her. It wasn't the smell of damp wood she had noticed before. It was sharper now, heavier, clinging stubbornly in the air. She pressed a hand against her stomach, forcing herself to continue. Downstairs, a weak beam of sunlight illuminated the living room. Dust particles swirled lazily, disturbed by her movement. On a wooden chair near the window lay Daniel's black suit jacket, discarded carelessly after the wedding day. It looked strangely out of place here, its sharp lines and polished fabric contrasting with the faded furniture. Evelyn's eyes lingered on it, drawn by something she could not explain. Slowly she approached, the scent growing stronger with each step. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. But then she noticed a faint, shifting movement on the fabric. Her body stiffened. She leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. Tiny white shapes squirmed along the hem of the jacket, twisting and wriggling against the dark cloth. Maggots. For a heartbeat, her mind refused to process it, grasping for a logical explanation. Perhaps it was dirt, perhaps she was mistaken, but then the fabric shifted slightly, and she realized they weren't just clinging to the surface, they were emerging from inside. Her hands flew to her mouth to stifle the gasp threatening to escape. The faint smell she had noticed on him during the ceremony was suddenly magnified 100 times. The sickly sweet odor of decay, unmistakable now. She recoiled but could not tear her eyes away. She crouched down, staring at the jacket as if it might reveal its secret if she looked long enough. The maggots spilled slowly from the inner lining, writhing blindly in the light. The thought that Daniel had worn this during their wedding, had stood beside her, touched her, kissed her while something rotted close to his skin made her stomach churn violently. Evelyn backed away, her hand brushing against the table behind her. A small vase toppled to the floor with a shatter, startling her into motion. Her breath came in short, frantic bursts, the room spinning as though the air itself had turned toxic. She pressed her back against the wall, desperate for space, for distance from that jacket. A flood of questions raced through her mind, colliding violently with one another. Why would maggots be inside the lining of his suit? How could decay cling to fabric, unless something far worse had been hidden there? She forced herself to steady her breathing, trying to think clearly. Perhaps an animal had died somewhere in the house, and the smell had clung to his clothing. Perhaps the jacket had been stored in a place infested with insects. Yet even as she tried to reason, her instincts screamed that this was no accident. The jacket seemed too deliberate, too carefully placed where she would find it. And the thought gnawed at her. If maggots were feeding on something inside, what exactly had been stitched or hidden within its lining? The sound of the clock ticking on the mantel grew louder, each second pounding in her ears. Evelyn turned away from the chair, unable to look any longer, but the image was seared into her mind. She felt tainted, as though simply being in the same room had infected her with something unseen. She wanted to leave the house, to run into the open fields and never come back. But another thought pinned her in place. If the jacket carried such a secret, what else might this house be hiding? Her eyes drifted toward the basement door, tucked away near the kitchen. She had passed it the night before, noting how firmly it was shut. Now, as the morning light grew stronger, she noticed the key dangling from a small hook nearby, as though waiting for her. The odor in the room pressed against her senses, urging her toward it. She hesitated, her heart pounding. Part of her screamed to stay away, but another part, the same part that had noticed Daniel's cold hands, his distant eyes, his muttering at the church, pushed her forward. With a shaky hand, Evelyn reached for the key. She didn't know what she would find, only that, whatever lay in that basement was the answer to the crawling secret she had just uncovered. The key felt heavier than it should have, its cold metal pressing into Evelyn's palm as if it carried the weight of something more than a locked door. For a long moment, she stood still in the kitchen, staring at the basement door across the room. The morning light didn't reach this corner of the house, leaving the wood in shadow. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, disturbed only by her shallow breaths. She tried to convince herself to walk away, to leave the jacket and the maggots behind, but her body moved without her permission. One step, then another, until she stood before the door that seemed to breathe unease into the air around it. The lock turned easily, the sound of the tumblers clicking loud in the silence. When the door creaked open, a stale rush of air poured out, colder than the rest of the house, thick with a smell that made her gag. It wasn't just rot, it was something layered, a mixture of mildew, rust, and something faintly metallic. She placed one hand on the wall to steady herself as she peered into the darkness below. The staircase was narrow, steep, and swallowed by shadow. Her heart pounded furiously as she descended, each step groaning beneath her weight. The walls closed in on either side, rough concrete brushing against her fingertips. She reached the bottom, fumbling for a light switch, and found a dangling chain. With one pull, a dim bulb flickered to life, swinging slightly as if disturbed by her arrival. Its weak glow spread across the room, revealing a sight that froze her in place. The basement was not empty storage as she had expected. Boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, some labeled with dates going back years. Wooden crates and metal trunks sat in the corners, but what caught her attention first were the strange bundles on the floor. They were wrapped tightly in cloth, marked with red symbols she didn't recognize, drawn crudely yet with unsettling precision. At first, she thought they might be old sacks of belongings, but the smell coming from them told her otherwise. Her eyes shifted to the shelves lining the walls. They held church records, worn Bibles and photographs of parishioners, but mixed among them were things that did not belong in a church's archive. A child's shoe, a broken necklace, a torn scarf stained dark at the edges. Evelyn reached out hesitantly, her hand trembling as she lifted the necklace from the shelf. The chain was snapped, the pendant bent as though it had been torn away in a struggle. She dropped it quickly, the sound of metal clattering against the wood echoing too loudly in the stillness. She turned toward one of the cloth bundles and crouched down, the light casting long shadows across the floor. The red markings were smeared, as though drawn with something thicker than ink. Her stomach twisted at the thought. The fabric had hardened in places, stiff from what looked disturbingly like dried fluids. She dared not unwrap it, terrified of what she might find inside, but her mind filled the gaps with images too horrific to ignore. The buzzing sound came next, faint but constant. Evelyn followed it to a corner where a small wooden chest sat slightly ajar. The stench around it was overwhelming. She forced herself closer, covering her nose with her sleeve, and when she nudged the lid open, the source revealed itself. Insects crawled over what appeared to be bones, small and fragmented, stripped bare by time. Her body convulsed, bile rising in her throat, but she forced herself to stay silent, every instinct screaming to run yet knowing she could not leave without understanding what this place truly was. The realization hit her with crushing weight. This basement wasn't storage. It was a shrine, a collection, a hidden record of something monstrous, preserved beneath the home where Daniel had brought her for their honeymoon. She backed away slowly, her eyes darting around the room, noticing more now that her fear sharpened her vision. Photographs pinned to the wall, some of faces she vaguely recognized from church gatherings, others of strangers, women, mostly, their expressions frozen in candid shots, some smiling, some unaware they were being photographed at all. Underneath several of the photos were dates written in Daniel's handwriting, each one paired with a box or bundle on the floor. Evelyn pressed a trembling hand to her chest, trying to keep her breathing quiet. Her mind swirled with images, Daniel's cold hands at the altar, his distant stare, the maggots crawling from his jacket. The fragments were forming into something undeniable, a truth she had stumbled into far too soon. She had married a man who wasn't what he seemed. The trusted preacher, the pillar of the town, was hiding secrets beneath his pious mask, secrets that rotted and wriggled like the insects spilling from his clothes. The light bulb above flickered once, then steadied. Evelyn froze, listening. Somewhere above her, the floorboards creaked. She wasn't alone in the house anymore. Evelyn pressed herself against the basement wall, her body rigid as the faint creak above traveled through the house. Her pulse thudded so hard it felt like the sound itself might give her away. For a moment, she thought Daniel had returned, and terror coursed through her at the thought of being found here, in this hidden room, surrounded by his secrets. But after several seconds of silence, the noise subsided. Perhaps it was just the house shifting, she told herself. Though deep down she knew nothing about this place was ordinary. The quiet that followed was heavier than before, pressing against her ears until she could hear only her own shallow breathing. Forcing herself to move, she turned back toward the shelves and boxes, unable to resist the need to know more. She slid one of the wooden crates toward her, its weight scraping against the floor. Inside, carefully arranged beneath old church bulletins, were yellowed police reports and missing person flyers. Her fingers trembled as she lifted one. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the face of a woman stared back at her. A face Evelyn recognized faintly from old community gatherings. Underneath was a date from nearly a decade earlier, the words missing, presumed dead stamped at the bottom. She shuffled through more documents. Each sheet carried another face, another life swallowed whole by mystery. Women of varying ages, some young, some middle-aged, all tied by the same grim fate. They had vanished without explanation, leaving families shattered and questions unanswered. Evelyn's breath hitched as she realized the dates on the reports matched the years scribbled beneath the photographs pinned to the wall. Each bundle, each box, each stained scrap of fabric in this basement corresponded to a person who had once lived, laughed, and trusted. Her hands moved faster now, driven by dread and determination. She found a thick folder bound with twine, tucked beneath a stack of church records. Untying it revealed handwritten notes in Daniel's unmistakable script. She scanned the words, her stomach twisting tighter with each line. They weren't sermons. They were journals. He had documented his obsessions, his frustrations, his rituals. Phrases like "they must be cleansed," and "the sacrifice ensures purity" leapt from the pages. He had written about his parishioners as though they were not people but objects, instruments for some twisted purpose. Evelyn felt the world tilt around her. The man she had married, the man the town adored as their preacher, had been quietly feeding an appetite no one suspected. His sermons about salvation were laced with double meaning. His devotion to the church had been nothing more than camouflage. For years he had walked among them, smiling, shaking hands, blessing children, while keeping this crypt of horrors hidden beneath the surface. Her gaze caught on a smaller, locked box tucked beneath the shelves. She hesitated, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. Nearby lay a ring of keys. She fumbled with them, until one slid into the lid creaked open, and inside were personal trinkets, rings, bracelets, watches, each neatly placed as though catalogued. She recognized one bracelet immediately. It belonged to Martha Green's cousin, who had disappeared years earlier. Evelyn's breath came in sharp gasps. These weren't just objects, they were trophies. Proof that Daniel had taken not just lives but pieces of them, hoarding his crimes like relic. Her stomach churned violently as her mind replayed the moments of her wedding. The cold grip of his hand, the distant look in his eyes, the muttering by the church wall. He hadn't been nervous. He had been calculating. He had led her here, to this house, not for romance, but because she was now another piece in the pattern, another life he could control and consume. She staggered backward, nearly tripping over one of the bundles. Her hand caught the edge of the table, steadying her trembling body. A new awareness gripped her. Every second she lingered here, she was in danger. If he returned and found her among his secrets, she would join the faces on the wall, reduced to a memory and a date scribbled beneath a photograph. The flickering bulb buzzed overhead, its light quivering like it might extinguish at any moment. The air felt suffocating, thick with dust and decay. Evelyn forced herself to take one final look at the evidence, the reports, the trinkets, the photographs. This was no longer doubt, this was certainty. Pastor Daniel Hayes was not a man of God. He was a predator who had hidden behind the cross to hunt those who trusted him most. The silence shattered with the slam of a car door outside. Evelyn froze, her heart racing to a terrifying rhythm. He was back. The faint sound of footsteps crunched across the gravel, drawing closer to the front door. Evelyn's hands fumbled desperately, shoving papers back into boxes, forcing lids closed, trying to erase any sign of her intrusion. The key to the locked box slipped from her shaking fingers and clattered to the floor, ringing sharply in the hollow basement. She snatched it up just as the floorboards above groaned with weight. Evelyn's pulse raced as the sound of Daniel's footsteps echoed directly above her. Each creak of the floorboards reverberated like thunder in the hollow basement, and every second he lingered upstairs tightened the knot in her chest. She clutched the ring of keys in her fist, forcing herself to breathe silently, praying the air would not betray her with the sound of her panic. The lamp swung faintly overhead, casting restless shadows across the walls, making the faces in the pinned photographs seem alive, their frozen stares locked on her. She felt their silent warning, "Leave before you join us." She eased backward toward the staircase, her movements agonizingly slow, careful not to disturb the floor littered with scraps of cloth and broken wood. The key she had dropped still burned cold against her palm, a reminder of how close she had come to exposure. Above her, Daniel moved through the rooms, his deliberate footsteps growing closer to the basement door. For one horrifying instant, the handle rattled. Evelyn froze mid-step, her body rigid, convinced the door would swing open and reveal her standing below, surrounded by his monstrous secrets. But the handle released, and the sound of his footsteps drifted away toward the kitchen. Relief washed over her in a sharp wave, though it carried no comfort, only urgency. Summoning every ounce of courage, she crept up the stairs, her weight shifted to the edges of each step to muffle the sound. At the top she pushed the door open a fraction and peered out. Daniel's back was to her as he stood at the sink, his hands steady, washing them in a rhythm almost ritualistic. She could see his reflection in the window, his lips moving silently, the same muttering she had witnessed after the ceremony. His eyes were fixed downward, expressionless, as though he were speaking to someone unseen. Evelyn slipped out, moving quickly but quietly down the hallway, her heart hammering with each step. She clutched her small travel bag from the chair where she had left it the night before, grateful she had not fully unpacked. Every second felt like a countdown, each breath a reminder that discovery meant certain death. She could hear Daniel humming now, low and tuneless, and the sound made her skin crawl. Reaching the front door, she twisted the lock with trembling fingers. It gave a sharp click, louder than she intended. Her body stiffened, and the humming stopped. Silence fell heavy across the house. She dared not turn around, terrified of what she might see. With one final pull, the door opened, and she slipped outside into the glaring daylight. The air outside was a shock to her lungs, fresh and open compared to the suffocating staleness of the house. She ran across the gravel, her shoes slipping, her breath ragged in the quiet countryside. Behind her the front door creaked open. She didn't look back. The car was still parked in the driveway, Daniel's keys likely still in his pocket, but she had no time to risk it. Instead, she darted toward the road, her gown snagging on thorns as she plunged through the hedges and into the fields beyond. Her legs burned as she ran, branches scratching her arms, the tall grass tugging at her dress. Every sound behind her felt like pursuit, the crack of a branch, the flap of a bird's wings, the echo of her own frantic breaths. She didn't stop until the distant spire of the church came into view, rising like a beacon above the town. With the last of her strength, she stumbled onto the main road, collapsing as a passing truck screeched to a halt. The driver leapt out, helping her to her feet, his face pale at the sight of her trembling form and wild eyes. Within hours, Evelyn was sitting in the sheriff's office, recounting everything she had seen. Sheriff Collins listened carefully, his expression darkening with each detail. Photographs, bones, trinkets, journals. The evidence was undeniable. A team of deputies was dispatched to the honeymoon house, and what they unearthed beneath its floors shocked even the most hardened investigators. Daniel Hayes was arrested that very evening, his composure eerily unshaken as he was led away in handcuffs. To the townspeople, it was unthinkable. The man who had baptized their children, officiated their weddings, and preached of virtue was unmasked as a predator who had stalked his flock for years. His name became synonymous with betrayal, and his church, once a place of hope, stood silent under the weight of his crimes. Evelyn filed for divorce the next morning, less than 24 hours after she had spoken her vows. She became the woman who survived a marriage destined to end in blood, the only one who had escaped before it was too late. The town would whisper her name for years, half in pity, half in awe, for she had lifted the mask from the face of the man they trusted most. Though she was free, the memory of the maggots spilling from his jacket, the bundles in the basement, and the stench of death that clung to the house would never leave her. Evelyn had looked into the abyss of evil and lived to tell its story, but she knew its shadow would always follow her.